Good evening. Welcome to yet another edition of Activate Worcester. The fact that you're watching this tells me that, like us, you haven't expired due to the snows, the never-ending snows. But hopefully we're now swinging into spring and nothing but good things in front of us. And that's a pretty good lead into what we have going on tonight. We have a very, very important guest, very important to everybody watching this, because you have to get out and do something to make this happen. We're in a situation in this state, and specifically in this city, where we have our, quote, senior senator, who this week decided to champion an increase in the minimum wage. Why not $22 an hour? So if you're dealing with that kind of logic in a person's responsibility level of the Senate of the United States, we need to have somebody who can balance that out. And we have that person tonight, and it's a very, very important guest for us. Sandy, tell us who our guest is, please.
Well, Ron, I think we're very fortunate tonight to have someone with us who embodies the whole Activate premise that we try and talk in about on the show. He's been in and out of various responsible government level positions and has spent a good number of years in the private sector at Gillette. He's now with a law firm, but prior to that, he was acting director of the Bureau of Alcohol and Tobacco and Firearms, as well as a federal attorney who was responsible for sending several Massachusetts notables up the river. So, and he was also in the Massachusetts House for several years. So, without further ado,
Who is this person?
Mike Sullivan.
Hey, Sandy, how are you?
Michael, great having you.
Running
Thank
for
you.
senator in the primary with the Republican Party right now. And my turf accountant says he's the leader at this point. So
It's great to be here. Thank you very much. I tell you, it's always nice visiting Worcester. Spring is in the air, even though it might not look like that when you step outside, particularly since we've had a fair amount of snow this winter. But I'm excited about being here. I know you guys know we announced on February 14th
Valentine's Day.
And I called my wife, and that was her Valentine's
Well, that was her gift.
She's still with me. She's out here in Worcester visiting the city of Worcester with me. And we decided we had less than 2 weeks to go to try to get on the ballot. And you talk about Activate. I mean, there was this groundswell of support that just kind of came together and continued to grow and did exceptionally well.
well, and that was tough weather at that time too. Yet your team went out completely voluntarily and got a record number of signatures. All volunteer, not a nickel paid for any of them.
Well, you're absolutely right on two fronts. First off, the weather was terrible. I think up until that point in time, we had a pretty mild winter and not much snow, and all of a sudden it turned. We had two major snowstorms. We had brutally cold weather. Notwithstanding that, hundreds of volunteers from around the Commonwealth of Massachusetts went out and knocked on doors, stood at dumps and landfills, stood out in front of supermarkets. We're in major stores and plazas and malls collecting signatures, and we got a record number of signatures in the shortest window of time.
Now, you needed what, 10,000?
We need 10,000 certified signatures, so that means you typically need a little bit more than that. Probably in the 14 to 15,000 range, in order to make sure that the signatures count, because some of them, they're just not going to be legible, or some people, party affiliation might not qualify, or they may not be a registered voter, but they sign just in general support, which you'd welcome. You want people to sign, but we ended up with almost 30,000 raw signatures, record number.
From the 14th of February.
Yeah, less than 2 weeks in all that horrible weather. The Secretary of State's office stopped counting when they reached 20,000. They said, no mas, you get enough, it's more than twice as many as you need, we're going to stop counting. So I tell you, I am grateful for the groundswell of support that we got across the Commonwealth.
They use the word organic an awful lot these days. And it seems to me that your candidacy so far has been organic, and it's just taking off. Why is that?
I just think that there's a constituency out there that knows that we can do much better, and looked around and said, you know what, nobody in this race, motivates me, and they just came together, and I'm absolutely confident. We as a society can do much better, and this generation can do much better. We certainly know the previous generation, the greatest generation, those that fought in one world war and came back and built up a glorious nation. As I sat and watched, it appeared that all the good that they created was being squandered by this generation. And it saddened me. And I know that we can do better. And the people that obviously jumped in and helped get me on the ballot, they believe we can do better. And I think the next generation deserves better. I think we're obligated to do more for the generation to come than what's been given to us.
From your perspective, what are the key points that you're trying to get across to people? Why Sullivan?
Well, I think we're in a horrible mess, to be honest with you, starting with Washington, D.C. And, I don't think you need a poll to figure that out. I mean, Washington, D.C. is broken. I mean, the fact of the matter is we haven't had a budget in 4 years. People I speak to put together a budget pretty much on a daily or weekly basis.
No, but Harry said we're going to have one before they leave for vacation.
Yeah, I think it's too little too late, sadly. We have a president that says debt's not bad, and, balancing the budget should not be a priority of our federal government. I think that's sad when you're thinking about $16 to $17 trillion of debt, and no plan to pay it off. Now, listen, I think all of us can relate to the fact that we've taken on debt in our lives, for worthwhile causes. Helping kids get through college, some extraordinary medical expenses, buying a home, but there's always a plan to pay it off. We have a federal government that thinks nothing about adding to the debt and to the deficits, and they talk about revenue, like a government produces goods and services, businesses produce revenue. I mean, they generate revenue. Government does one or two things, or in our case, two things. They print money and they raise taxes. And they're printing a lot of money, and at some point in time, it's going to affect us in terms of inflation. And we have this mounting debt with a government that has no plans on paying it back. I mean,
You know what I find fascinating? Literally everything you've said rings more than true. Thank God there are things like cameras and YouTube and so on and so forth, because anything you say can and will be held against you. The current resident of the White House, when he was running back in 2008, the first time, he was talking about this horrible situation that the country was in. We had almost $9 trillion in debt, and every child was going to be burdened with $30,000. Well, what happened in the ensuing 4 or 5 years? Now it's 16, and they're talking about by the time his reign of terror has ended, it'll be between 18 and 20 trillion. Completely unsustainable, insane. Right. And it kind of goes back to John Kenneth Galbraith back in the 50s, good Harvard man, who felt that it's a good thing to leverage government finances and to owe money out. And the folks have been taking it and running with it for the last 60, 65 years, whatever it is. And we're in a situation right now that's, I think we're at the point of no return.
Well, I hope not, and I do remain optimistic that we aren't at a point of no return. I honestly believe that our best days still lie ahead if people of like minds are able to come together and essentially begin the process of resolving this catastrophic issue. And if we do nothing, you're absolutely right. If we let this debt continue to grow with no plan, it's unsustainable. At some point in time, we're not going to be able to protect the United States the way that we expected. So national security and national defense is going to suffer irreparably. We're not going to be able to live up to our commitment to our seniors in terms of what they've earned, in terms of benefits, things that they've paid into, and the whole infrastructure will eventually collapse. At some point in time, you're not going to have enough people contributing to provide for the essential services that we need, as a society.
Well, but just the debt service will outstrip any government revenue.
I think that's a great point. I mean, right now, it's 40 cents of every dollar essentially goes to service the debt. I mean, I think that's unconscionable. I mean, who in their right mind wants to spend 40 cents of every dollar? And if you think if you're able to reduce that debt service substantially, you have you have two things you can do with those savings. One, you can lower the overall cost of government, by not taking as much in, from the taxpayers, and you can make sure that you're providing all the essential services that a government is obligated to provide. But right now, there is no plan. But I do remain hopeful that in fact, a plan can be put in place and we get on a path to a balanced budget. I mean, the New York Times said debt is good, but $16 trillion and no plan to pay it back. I mean, it's not good for anybody. It's certainly not good for our generation, and we're going to leave less to the next generation, and I think that's completely unfair. And I'm willing to do more because I think the next generation deserves better, and I know that our generation is capable of much better.
Well, it's odd that the New York Times would say that the debt is good, since their debt continues to mount and they continue to, lay people off. So
Right.
I don't know how you square those two situations.
Yeah, in terms of the value, in terms of their asset
Right. continues
to deteriorate, and you wonder if it has something to do with the product.
To make these things happen, I guess there's more red tape there than in China. How do you cut through the red tape? How do you become a catalyst to turning the whole ship around?
I think you just start with the basics. And I look at things very simply, to be honest with you. And you and I work for the Gillette Company, and Gillette was a very successful company. It empowered its employees to essentially
Yes, it did.
do some great things. There are a lot of people in our country, I think, just want to be empowered, right, to make decisions on their own, to have an opportunity for success. But when you think about the way that our government operates, just in the process of passing legislation, you look at Obamacare, the bill itself. I mean, thousands of pages long. Likely that few, if any, of our representatives in government read it. The ones that read it, probably fewer understood exactly what was in there. It was developed really by special interest and constituencies that would benefit from the bill. And that's not enough. I mean, you go from there to regulations, right, that are essentially crafted outside the legislative process.
You've seen the stack of paper, right?
Yeah, I
It's
mean,
20,000 pages and counting.
that's outrageous. So I start with a very simple approach. I think if we can write a constitution that kids in the elementary school can read and understand, every bill that we file should be easily read and easily understood. Listen, I'm a lawyer by profession today, so I have nothing against lawyers, but I don't think people should have to hire lawyers and accountants in order to figure out what our government is expecting, from them. So make it simple. And the same is true with regards to regulation. Simplify the process. It's preventing small businesses from investing. This uncertainty in terms of where our government is and where it's going prevents the creation of jobs in the private sector. And that's really what's going to get us on a path to a balanced budget. It's not more taxes, it's more taxpayers. It's creating jobs in the private sector, and their income generates more taxes. So we don't need more taxes, we need more taxpayers.
When you have, I think we've just gone around the bend, where more than half the people who are getting government kickbacks, subsidies, entitlements, whatever, they're getting more than they're putting into the system. You keep that thing going for a while, and eventually it's going to implode.
Right.
That's the only thing that can happen.
You're absolutely right. And listen, the tax code is probably a place you have to start. It's far too complicated. I mean, somebody said it's, 19 times longer than the Bible and 19 times less interesting than the other Bible.
70 some odd thousand pages, I think.
It's a horrible process in which we determine what people's tax obligations are, and then you have all these adjustments that can take place. So the most sophisticated probably benefit the most in terms of the resources. The average person has to rely on very simple forms to essentially submit their taxes. So I think you'd really scrap it, and start from a process that's very simple in terms of what people's tax obligations are. And it's probably a crazy idea, but I'm going to suggest it anyways on your show. I think everybody should have something into the system. Even if it's $1, at the end of the day when they file their tax returns, then they have a real sense of ownership in their government. where they can feel like, you know what, I'm kind of an owner in this government, I contributed. So I understand that there are some people at the basic levels of poverty that, you know, we as a government should try to give them a helping hand, to give them the opportunities that were provided, you know, to my parents. My father's a first-generation American, and the opportunities that are provided to others as well. But if everybody had $1 in the system, they might feel that they had more of a say in terms of what their government is doing. So they're, you know, a giver as opposed to a taker. I think they'd feel a lot more empowered, you know, about being active in their government.
We go back to somebody from Massachusetts a number of years ago who said something like, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. Where have we gone wrong in the last 50 years?
Yeah.
Where it's total flip.
It's the fault of our government. I don't think we have anybody to blame but our government itself in terms of, you know, doing this total flip, you know, from what John F. Kennedy, you know, talked about, I don't know, 50 years ago.
Yeah.
In terms of, you know, his passion and expectations. You wonder where John F. Kennedy would be today as relates to, you know, some of the policies and practices of his party.
He wouldn't be a Democrat.
I'm not sure the Democrats would embrace him today.
Right.
You know, he might be a Democrat by, you know, registration, but I'm not sure that he would be able to essentially, you know, make it through a Democratic primary because they don't have the same attitude that John F. Kennedy had. But John F. Kennedy motivated, you know, a whole generation of people, you know, to serve and to contribute. And I think that there is a generation of people out there that are waiting to be given the same opportunity to contribute. But when you have a government that's creating more jobs in the public sector than the private sector, opportunities are pretty limited. So the government has to get out of the way and let the private sector essentially provide the best and greatest opportunities for the people.
So we've all worked in the private sector.
Yes.
And we've all probably been through good times and bad. And when things get tough, every place that I've ever worked, the boss comes in and says, you know, we got to make do with a little less. We can't spend as much.
Right.
The boss never comes in and says, guess what, times are tough, and we're going to go take more loans out.
Right.
It just doesn't work that way. And so the whole notion of the way the federal government budgets with this automatic increase built in year over year as the baseline to start out with, as opposed to zero-based budgeting that says, okay, what are we going to do next year, and how much do you think you need to do it?
Right.
It's all upside down.
Right.
And this, so that the federal government baseline budgeting has to
Right.
go somewhere other than where it is now. Maybe it's the penny plan, maybe it's some other approach.
Well, I mean, those are excellent points, and it's counterintuitive in government in terms of the way that they develop their budgets, right? Their budgets are based on how much money did you spend this year as your base for purposes of spending it next year. You're not rewarded in government for being creative, you know, with regards to
It's
being
almost
effective
punitive.
and efficient, right?
It's true.
You don't want to leave, you know, maybe the sales guys used to say this, you don't want to leave, you know, money on the table. Well, in government, you don't want to leave money on the table because it might adversely affect your budget the following year. Now, I'll tell you, there are a lot of people in government that would take the approach that you're taking. And there are opportunities to be more effective and more efficient, to shrink the size of my budget and give some money back. You know, rescind the funds. We had to do it on several occasions when I was with the Department of Justice to help fund the war effort. And quite honestly, we were glad to do it. But when we looked, our mission was unaffected. You know, we were still able to provide the necessary mission of the agency. That was both at the United States Attorney's Office and also as the director of ATF. So clearly it can be done. And that's why, you know, I was, you know, so disappointed in terms of the inability for the government to come together to make a 2.3 or 2.4% cut. And now obviously did the sequestration, it's across the board.
But the cut isn't even off existing.
It's not, no.
It's
off
against
a percentage
future.
of the growth.
It's just lower growth.
Right, exactly. It slows down the growth. And that's not going to get to the heart of the problem, which really is the deficit and then the growing debt. So you have to essentially prioritize. I mean, you do it in business. You do it at home as well. I mean, there are times
You better.
where people's salaries go up And there are times, as a result of a layoff, a change in jobs, a health issue, salaries go down, right? So family income goes down. People manage to that. Our government says, well, even though we don't have as much, they call it revenue, I'll call it taxes, even though we don't have as much taxes, coming in, we're still going to spend more money than we did last year. That makes no sense at all. And the point you made earlier, it's unsustainable. At some point in time, we're going to be facing the same consequences that some of the European countries faced, which is going to be massive, drastic cuts. I think you put together a plan that gets on a balanced budget, a balanced approach. States do it.
How can anyone argue against it? That's what just astounds me day after day. How can we ever argue to not meet our obligations and make sure that we don't go bankrupt?
Right.
California is bankrupt. Illinois is bankrupt. New York doesn't want to talk about it, but they're very close.
Yeah.
And there's several other states headed that way.
Right.
With billions and billions of dollars of unfunded liabilities. Look at the pension problem in Illinois.
Right.
And they're going to ask the feds to come in and fix that for them.
Yeah. Yeah, and without any ability to do it, unless you're essentially going to add to the debt and add to deficits in a fiscal year. I don't know. I've never heard a good argument as to the reasons why we continue to add to both our debt and continue to grow the deficits beyond this issue about this fiscal cliff that everybody claims that we're going to drive off of at some point in time. And I know that there's been these risks of the cliff itself, and Congress at the last minute decides they're going to do something. That's not the way to manage a government. I mean, they've had years to address the problem, and they try to solve it in a matter of minutes, as opposed to putting together a realistic plan. The president put together a commission to look at these things, and they come back essentially said, these are the steps you should consider taking, and he was dismissive of it. Some of these are tough decisions, but leadership means that
Making
sometimes
tough
you have to make tough
decisions.
decisions. I think of Abraham Lincoln. I mean, he served, I think, probably at the most challenging time at any point in our nation. And he was able to make some pretty tough decisions. And I think his style is the type of style that certainly others should emulate. I mean, you listen to the other side, you learn from their experiences, and you make some decisions in the best interest of a nation. Now, not everybody's going to be happy with it. There are going to be some people disappointed, but you do it for the greater good.
Unfortunately, the thing is so polarized. When people talk about bipartisanship and they should sort of get together, the chasm is so wide, but basically between socialism and capitalism. And I still think that's what the Republican Party is all about. It's about capitalism. Unfortunately, the Democrats have become a one-trick pony. This is the way it's done. If you just check the voting logs, they're all in total lockstep. And frankly, I think that in this state, which is a very strong, unfortunately, Democratic state, I believe that there's lots and lots of people that are out there that are looking for common sense. And to my way of thinking, this is something that you're bringing, and there is precedent. 2 years ago, Scott Brown came out of nowhere with a very short budget, didn't have lots of help from the Republican Party, and muscled his way in. And in my view, for what it's worth, if a Mike Sullivan gets out there, meets the people, get a chance to look at your background, compare that to whoever your competitor is going to be, because it's going to be a good, solid congressman who's been sitting there for 20 or 30 years basically doing nothing, drawing a paycheck, and being part of the problem. And it's time to stop playing kissy face.
Right.
And you have to, I think, part of it is you have to appeal to people who are willing to think a little bit, rather than just go in lockstep.
I think there's scores of people around the Commonwealth of Massachusetts essentially have the similar views. They're essentially ready to get engaged, and they realize doing nothing is the worst thing that could happen to them. And they know that we can do better, and they're prepared to help us get there. And I think the signature drive is just one example of that. As I'm traveling the state, the feedback is extremely positive.
It's exciting.
It really is. I mean, there's this kind of enthusiasm in terms of the campaign, something that certainly I haven't experienced previously. I think we saw some of that with Scott Brown. That was focused in on one particular issue, I think, the
Pretty
health
much,
care,
yeah,
the
yeah.
Obamacare, that motivated a lot of interest,
Yeah.
a lot of interest from outside the state as well. Here, I think it's actually the grassroots saying, you know what? We really have to do something significant in order to make sure that our better days still lie ahead. And people are willing to make that commitment, particularly as they think about their own lives and the next generation, their kids, and making sure that their kids have the opportunities that we had in life. And that's why I'm in the fight. And that's the reason why I'm so excited about it, because I honestly believe that we're going to do this. We're going to win the primary, and we're going to win the general election. And it's apparent to me that the Democratic machine, the Democratic bosses, and I'm not talking about the rank and file Democrats, a lot of them are good people and have similar views that we have. I'm talking about the people that are concerned mostly about power and not about service.
Well, and that's what it's all about in D.C.
It
too.
is, and that's a sad commentary of either party. The Democrats are out attacking me. Now, this is a Republican primary. The day that I submitted my nomination papers, the Democrats were on TV attacking me. Today, they're on TV again, attacking me. And it's not because they want to see me in the general. They're fearful about seeing me in the general because they know that we have the people behind us. And the thing that frightens them the most is an engaged electorate. And this electorate's engaged, and that's why I'm excited.
It's an excellent point, and to continue the activity that you've got going, whoever is watching this at this point, what do they need to do to support you?
Well, Mike Sullivan for Senate, I think, is the best place that they can go. Kind of simple and pretty straightforward. Mike Sullivan for Senate. They can go there. There's an opportunity for them to get engaged in the campaign. Would love to have their input. Would love to have their feedback. Would love to have their support, as volunteers. This campaign, quite honestly, is going to be won in the field. I know other people are going to be spending a ton of money in terms of TV ads. The Democrats are going to spend a ton of money to try to bloody me up in the Republican primary. I think most people are tired of that. So Mike Sullivan for Senate.
Amen.
All right.
April 30th is the...
April 30th is the primary. Come on out and vote. We need everybody voting on April 30th.
And we'd like to have you
And then
back
June
here
25th.
in May
Great.
to get moving forward.
Excellent. Love to come back.
Wonderful having you.
Thanks,
on.
Roy.
Thank you so
Danny,
much.
thank you very
Thanks,
much.
Mike.
Thanks.